And welcome back to MGD 111 Photoshop. This week's modules, we're going to look at various selection tools in Photoshop. I have the picture called Sled JPEG open. If you want to follow along, you might want to open this particular one. We've mentioned that there's various adjustments and all sorts of modifications that we can do to an image in Photoshop. Now, we can do that to the entire image, or we can just select certain parts of the image to work on. And there are various tools for doing that. The first one we want to look at is called the rectangular marquee, and you should find it in your tools. It should be in the second group here. If you don't see a rectangle here, it's because you've got one of these other similar tools. We'll take a look at those too, but let's go to the rectangular marquee tool. And simply what we do is we put the cursor where we want it, and we draw a rectangle, and voila! We have selected an area. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me just make a simple adjustment here, and you can see how it works. So, adjustments, brightness, contrast. As you can see, whatever adjustments I'm making, whether I'm painting or drawing or scribbling or changing brightness and contrast, it only affects what's inside that area. I'm going to click Cancel here. So we can use that tool to select certain parts of the image to work on. Now, there's several rules that apply to our selection tools that we're going to be learning about. So I just want to show you what some of these things do. First of all, this is a lovely rectangle. I can move it around if I don't do anything else, if I don't select any other tools or anything. If I go to the tool at the top here, that's the Move tool, you'll notice when I move this selection, it actually moves not just the outline, but what's inside the outline as well. So be careful whenever you lay down a rectangle or any sort of selection, really. You can move it as long as you're still in that selection tool. Now, that rectangle's lovely, but what if we wanted to add to this selection? Okay, very important here. When we hold down the Shift key, let's take a good look at our cursor here. When I hold down the Shift key, you'll notice a little plus sign appears next to our rectangle. What does that mean? Well, let's watch. As I hold down the Shift key and draw, it adds that part to the previous selection. And I can do that as often as I want. Now, I'm sort of selecting a bunch of nonsense here, but you get the sense of how we can use this tool. Now, let's say we want to shrink the selection and use less of it. Let's say we want to cut a hole in the middle of the selection. Let's zoom in again. In this case, we want to hold down the Option key. Notice we get a minus sign next to our cursor. So, let me zoom back out again. If we use the minus key, we can delete part of what we have selected. So let's just go ahead and do another quick adjustment so you can really see what we're working with here. And again, whatever shape that we have selected, only that part will be modified. I'm going to click Cancel there. Now to deselect, there's several things we can do. The easiest one, you could go up to the menu and go deselect, but it's Command D. Just Command D will boop, deselect whatever you had there. The other thing too is if I'm using this tool here, the rectangle tool or any of the marquee tools, if instead of holding down Shift or Option, if I just click somewhere else, it deletes it and prepares to start a new selection. So just get used to using one of those two methods. Command D is the easiest one. So anytime you have a selection, Command D. Now, a couple things we need to learn up here in the control bar, and this is kind of cool. There's something called feather, and all of our selection tools have this feather option, and it measures it in pixels. The default is 0 pixels. Now, let's just, for the sake of showing you exactly what this thing can do, I'm going to make the feather sort of big. I'm going to make it 10 pixels. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's draw another rectangle. Draw a rectangle in the sky. You'll notice the corners sort of look rounded after I draw it. So what does that mean? Well, let's make a quick adjustment, brightness, contrast, and you'll see that my selection here has a faded edge. It has a 10 pixel fade that goes to both sides of our selection. That's a really handy tool for a lot of different things, especially if you're isolating kind of an oddly shaped thing, like say a person, which we'll do with some other tools later on. If you add a feather, it sort of softens the edge and makes it look a little less harsh. So make sure that you control your feathering. Unfortunately, we can't retroactively change it. Let's say I drew that box and I decided that I wanted more feathering. I can't just suddenly say, oh, 100 feathers, 100 pixels of feathering. It just won't let me do it. I have to deselect and draw a new box. And again, you'll see it has a really big radius on its curves now. So hold down the plus key to add to your selection. Hold down the minus key, or I'm sorry, the option key to subtract from it. And also you can modify things with your feather. And by the way, if I decide I want a feather on this part of it, but not on the next part, I can set my feather back to 0. And if I hold down the shift key, you'll notice I have a sharp edge on this selection. So we can dance back and forth between parts of an object that are lightly feathered and parts that have a harsh edge. If that doesn't seem very practical, well, some of the examples that we're going to do throughout the semester will make it seem practical. So just get used to that. All right, that is the rectangle marquee.